Well, welcome everybody. My name is Katie Kosis. I'm the Director of Financial Aid at NAG University. Tonight, we are just going to go through an overview of the FAFSA process and then kind of some of the financial aid processes after that, come after filing the FAFSA. So if you have any questions, feel free to just pop them in the chat box and we will get to them as we go along. Or if I don't see them, we'll definitely get to them right after we're done with the presentation. Okay, and then I think everybody is, but if you haven't, if you could make sure that you mute just so that with the recording, it doesn't kind of pick up all the feedback. So there's my contact information. The 8686 number is actually the general financial aid number to my team. So if you have any general financial aid questions, any one of us can help with that. But my direct email is listed on there and it'll be up again at the end. Okay. So for completing the FAFSA form, I should ask, is everyone a senior on here then? Okay, great. So if you haven't already, you do need to complete or apply for your FSA ID. This is your electronic signature for any of the forms, any federal forms really, for the next year, really your college career. So make sure you complete this as soon as you can. You'll need one for yourself as a student and then one for at least one of your parents. Both parents don't need to do it, but at least one does. Please be sure to actually use separate email addresses, one for the student and one for the parent. If you try using the same one, it's going to mess up the application. So be sure you're using separate email addresses when creating your FSA IDs. Just go to fsaid.ed.gov to complete your FSA ID. It doesn't take too long to actually complete the form online, but it might take a couple of days for actually to go through the process and to certify that all of your information is correct. So just make sure you give yourself some extra time on that. So hopefully this was emailed to you. If not, I'll put it in the chat later. But this is the FAFSA on the web worksheet for 21-22. And that's the FAFSA you're going to be filling out. What's on the screen is just a worksheet. You don't actually fill this out and send it in. It's just kind of a guide. And we're going to be going over that today. So the first part of the worksheet is the student information. And this is when you're on the website filling out the FAFSA, it is the student's FAFSA. So please be sure you're being careful with whose information you're logging in with or putting into the form because it's based upon the student's information. So basic information, social security number, date of birth, first, last name. It's going to ask for the citizenship status of the student, whether they're a U.S. citizen or an eligible non-citizen. You do have to be a U.S. citizen or an eligible non-citizen in order to be eligible for any FAFSA funds. And it'll then ask on the student side if they're single, married. Typically, most students in high school are single, but if not, you would check one of the other boxes. Okay, it's then going to ask for the male students if you have registered for the selective service. Now, this is actually probably going away in a couple years, but until then, you do have to register for the selective service if you're a male student in order to be eligible for any federal aid. If you're 17 years old at the time, you don't have to do it, but as soon as you turn 18, you will be asked to sign up. It's then going to ask for just some preliminary information about your parents, where is the highest level of schooling that they completed for parent 1 and parent 2. You will note it doesn't say mother, it doesn't say father, it says parent 1 and parent 2. Just be careful that you're using the same information throughout the FAFSA for parent 1 and parent 2. Don't get them mixed up, that does happen sometimes. It's also then going to ask some questions to determine whether or not the student is considered a dependent student. And what that means is that if you are considered a dependent student, then the student will have to provide parental information on the FAFSA. If you're considered an independent student, means you don't have to provide parental information, but you do have to meet one of these criteria. So whether you're born before 1998 or January 1st, 1998, if you're married, if you have children, if you're in legal guardianship, if you are emancipated, any one of those things that you see on the screen right now, if you can say yes to any one of those things, you can check that off. But just be prepared that the schools that you're applying to will probably ask for additional documentation to back that up. It's not that we don't, believe that you fall into one of these categories, but unfortunately, we do find that students check off one of these boxes incorrectly. So we just want to confirm that you're filling it out the right way and whether you have to provide your parents' information or not. So once you get through that, and typically most high school students are considered dependent. They can't say yes to any one of these. And then they'll be required to report parental information. So now that you got to that part, one of the questions I get asked most often is, okay, well, who do I report for my parents? So if your parents are married or if they're unmarried but living together, then you would report both parents' information on your FAFSA. If your parents are divorced, you would report whoever you as a student live with more than 50% of the time with during the prior 12 months. If, and I know, technically there's 365 days in a year, so you really can't be 50-50, but I know there's some, court cases that say, 50% joint custody. So if that's the case, and you spend equal amount of time with each parent, then you would report whichever parent provides the most financial support during that same time period. So make sure you work with your parents to determine which one that might be, and then that's the parent information you would put on there. Now, if the parent, let's say your parents are divorced and your you live with your mom and your mom is remarried, you do have to then report stepdad's information or step-parents' information on there, as well as, basic information as well as their income information. So it's going to go into, like I said, the parent information. Now that you determined which parent to report or parents, you're going to put down their basic information. And then also it's going to start asking you about their income information. So did they file taxes or do they not have to file taxes? Keep in mind, so if everyone's senior right now, you'll be completing the 21-22 FAFSA, and you'll be using 2019 tax information. I know it can get very confusing about all the different years, but just make sure you kind of keep that in mind. So everyone should, in theory, have the 2019 taxes done, which it was great. You can then actually use the IRS data retrieval tool. We'll get that a little bit more into that in a bit. But work with your parents to determine, did they file taxes, did they not, so that you're reporting the correct information. It's then going to ask you specific questions about that for adjusted gross income and taxes paid and whatnot. On the taxes for the income earned for parent 1 and parent 2 is then also going to ask in either 2019 or 2020 if anyone in the household received Medicaid, SSI, SNAP benefits, or food stamps, free reduced school lunch, TANF, WIC, any one of those things, you would check that box if anyone in the household received it either during 2019 or 2020. And then it's going to ask some additional information. In 2019, did they pay child support? Did they receive child support? Did they put any money into their 401k? A lot of those questions, a lot of times, you're not going to answer yes to all of these, but if you are able to put any amounts in there, you would go ahead and do that. After you do all that, it will then ask potentially if for your parents to report any asset information. It's not always going to ask this because it does a lot of skip logic, and based upon your previous responses for number of people in the household, number of people in college, the income and whatnot, you might not have to report what your assets are. You might not meet that threshold, but if you do, then your parents and yourself, we'll get to that in a second, would then have to report their assets. And assets would be considered cash, savings, and checking accounts, what's in there as of the day you're filling out the FAFSA. Net worth of any other investments that you might have, like stocks, bonds, those types of things. And then if they have a business or an investment firm, they would report that. One thing to keep in mind, net worth of other investments like stocks and bonds, it does not include what is in your 401k. So please don't include, parents out there, please don't include, any amounts you might have in your 401k. That's not what they're looking at. In the previous question, they were looking at if you provided anything towards your 401k for that year, but they're not looking for the overall total of any of those retirement plans. And all this would be as of the day you're filling out the FAFSA. So even though you're using 2019 tax information, the asset information is based upon as of today. Now that you answered all that information, it's then going to go into the student information. So it's all the same questions that you just had to answer for the parent, but now based upon the student. So did the student file taxes in 2019? Now, 2 years ago almost by the time we're looking into this. So it might, you might not have had a job as a student, as a, sophomore, junior. So you might just have to say not going to file or didn't earn anything, not a problem. But if you did file, please be sure to fill out correctly, put in your adjusted gross income, and then, same thing, income earned, taxes paid. Well, I'll also ask you as a student, did anyone in your household receive any one of those things? Typically as a student, you didn't. Parents do. So you might not have to answer any of those. Questions as the parent, students have these, but you might have a few. But yeah, typically you won't have any, you're not paying child support, you're not receiving it, you don't have a 401k yet. So typically students don't have to say yes to any of these, but just in case, keep those in mind. And you might ask a student about their assets, and it would be the same thing: cash, savings, checkings. Probably don't have any investments. Some do, and probably don't have any business income to report for that. Okay, that was like the basic information you're going to need to complete the FAFSA. In order to actually complete the FAFSA, because as I said, keep in mind that the form, the FAFSA on the web worksheet, is just a guide. You don't actually fill it out and send it in. You're going to do everything online, and that is where you go to studentaid.gov or FAFSA.gov. Both websites take you to the same place. And if you've never been to FAFSA, you've never, had to fill it out before, then you go to new-to-FAFSA.gov, click start here, and then we'll get you started. Take you to this page to log in. You're going to say, yes, I'm the student filling this out, or I'm the parent. The only difference in this is just how they present the questions to you. It's going to be all the same questions. It's just how they present, how the wording is, depending upon which one you click on. I mentioned before, as we were talking about the tax sections, about the IRS data retrieval tool. So what this is that when you're in the FAFSA, in those sections asking about income and taxes, it will ask you, would you like to transfer the information from the IRS, or would you like to use the IRS data retrieval tool? And if you say yes to this, which I highly encourage because it really puts in the accurate, correct information, it lessens the chances of you getting selected for verification. It's less documentation you have to provide if you do get selected. What it does is it takes the information directly from the IRS and puts it into your FAFSA form. So it will put your adjusted gross income, your taxes paid, if you have any education credits. There's a few other things that it puts in there too. So it's available to use, as soon as the FAFSA opens up, which it did in October. So again, we highly encourage you to use the data retrieval tool for both the parent and the student if you file taxes. If you didn't file, then of course you wouldn't be able to do that. There are a few instances where you're not able to use it. If you had like identity theft issues, they don't really allow you to do that. It kind of comes up as an error. And same thing if you, as parents, filed your taxes married filing separately. At this time, it doesn't allow you to do the data retrieval tool because it only can look at one, unfortunately. So maybe at some point in the future that'll be a thing, but not at the moment. So again, please use that if you can. It really does reduce your chances of either getting selected for verification or, kind of eases the amount of paperwork you'll have to provide later. Okay, there are some questions. Let me see. Yes, Kate, it is very easy to use. Then Zach is just questions about help to file. Okay, so I will get back to that again if you don't mind. So after you complete the FAFSA form, after you use the data retrieval tool, it will actually give you an emailed version of what you're seeing, which is called the Student Aid Report or the SAR report. Again, this is like a printed version, but for most part, you actually will just be emailed it. And it's what it is, it just lists all the questions you just answered. It will actually just list all your answers on there so you can review it and make sure that it's all correct. I do encourage you to do that because sometimes mistakes are made, especially I've seen like assets, people put extra zeros when that's not correct. So make sure you're looking at it. A couple of things when you do receive it, just to keep note of. Over here on the right-hand side, it says the data release number or the DRN number. Is important. So if you let's say you're applying to multiple schools and you didn't list list that school on your first FAFSA, you can give them that school the DRN number, and they'll be able to actually add themselves to the FAFSA on your behalf. So it's important to keep track of that number. It's a 4-digit number. The next thing that's really important to know is the expected contribution, or EFC. That's lots of acronyms in financial aid. You will get used to them, I promise. But EFC, which in this case is zero, um, is the pretty much the standard way that all schools use to put together financial aid packages for students. So in this case, like I said, it's zero. That does not necessarily mean that they will only owe zero, for their balance for wherever the student goes, but it's really just a way that schools are able to standardize putting together financial aid packages for students. It's based upon all the information that you put into the FAFSA. So number in household, number in college, your income, parents' income, all that goes into the calculation, and the number is what comes out. You also notice that this one has an asterisk next to it. That means that this student has been selected for the verification process. And what that means is that the federal government, when they're processing, their applications, they say it's randomly, it is random, but it's based upon, an algorithm that they have that will select students for the verification process. It used to be about 30% of students. It's been decreasing each year. I think they're around 20% this year of students will get selected. And when that happens, you as the student and the parent will have to provide the schools you're applying to additional documentation so that the schools can actually confirm that all the information you put on the FAFSA is correct. So you might, like I said, whatever, it's a standard thing. So every school you're applying to would get this FAFSA, showing that you're selected. I suggest potentially, if you're applying to a lot of schools, maybe you don't want to send all the information to every single school. Maybe I suggest only doing it to the ones you're truly serious about. So it just kind of cuts down on all the paperwork. And then also this one also has a C code, and that means that something's wrong with the FAFSA. So if you see that on your STAR report, there's a problem. You need to contact the schools you're looking at to see what it is and how to resolve it. It will actually be listed, it'll tell you on your report kind of what the issue is. But if you want some further clarification, definitely reach out to the schools to see. It could be something because the selective service wasn't completed. It could be that there's an error with the social security number compared to the date of birth or something like that. So definitely take the time to reach out because we really can't process a financial aid package for you until that C code is resolved. On the FAFSA, when you're in it, you can actually list up to 10 schools on it. So 10 different schools you can list up on it. If you want to list more than that, what you'll have to do is you'll have to, list those 10 schools, wait for it to process. I say give it about a week for it to fully go through, then go back in, take some schools off and put some more schools on. Just be careful and that you're writing all this down and you're keeping track of what schools you're taking off and what schools you're adding. Because if you end up taking off a school that you actually want to go to, as the months go by, they are no longer going to be receiving any updates on your FAFSAs. So be sure that you're keeping track of who you're taking off and who you're adding. Once you hit the submit button, each school will receive the FAFSA electronically within about 3 to 5 days, business days. Sometimes it's really only a couple days, and sometimes it's a little bit longer, just based on whether it's a weekend or maybe a holiday. And then once you do that, and the schools receive it, they will, as long as you're an accepted student at that school, we will start putting together financial aid packages for you. And you will then start seeing a range really of when those award letters or financial aid offers start going out. So you might have already received some in December. Here at Niagara, our first batch is actually going out next week. Some schools don't do it until February, March. So each school is different based upon their own timelines. So you might definitely see that range of when you start receiving financial aid award letters. Okay, now that we kind of went through all of the FAFSA components, I just want to go into a little bit further about some of the terms you'll be seeing and what the different things mean when you start getting your financial aid packages and the breakdowns. So one of the terms you really want to know is the cost of attendance, or the COA. And this is important because as per federal regulations, schools are not allowed to offer aid above and beyond what the cost of attendance is. And students and parents kind of get confused on that. So I just wanted to go through what exactly it is. First off, it's comprised of direct cost and indirect cost. Direct cost would be the things that are charged directly to you as a student, such as tuition, fees, potentially books and supplies. Each school's different on that. Room and board if you're living on campus. And then you have your indirect cost, which would be books and supplies if they're not charged directly to you, personal costs, transportation costs, and if you're a commuter, then a room and board cost. So those costs combine into your cost of attendance, and it can vary widely from school to school because every school is different. They're different with their room board amounts, they're different with their tuition amounts. So it's your cost of attendance is really individualized to you at each school. You have your cost of attendance. You then have your expected family contribution, as we said earlier, your EFC. And this is the amount that a family can reasonably be expected to contribute. Although really it's more, like I said, a standard way for schools to be able to put together financial aid packages for students. It does stay the same regardless of college. So whether you're going to a state school or a private school, the EFC does remain the same. It has the two components, the parent and the student contribution, again, based upon all that information you put into the FAFSA. And it's calculated using, as I said, the data and the federal process. So then we come to financial need. So we take that cost of attendance, that larger number, which comprises of all the different costs. We then have your EFC from your FAFSA. And when we take the COA and minus away the EFC, that remaining number is your financial need. And that means that schools can award you with need-based aid up to that amount. So if you receive a financial aid package and it only has, let's say, maybe a merit scholarship and let's say an unsubsidized loan, which we'll get to in a little bit, that probably means based upon all those calculations, you don't have any financial need and you would not be eligible for any of those other award programs. But again, every student is different and it's going to vary from school to school because of those different cost of attendances. So it is very hard to compare one student to another. Everyone's pretty individualized. All right, so when you get those financial aid offers, whether they're through the mail or you're getting an online version of it, you're going to see all these different types of awards in aid programs. And the two main ones, scholarships and grants. Scholarships, like I said, these are typically ones where you get them based upon your grades from high school or you're from a previous college. So those are scholarships, grants, need-based grants, Pell grants, opportunity grants. Those are things, some of those based upon your FAFSA form. Scholarships and grants, free money, don't have to pay that back. We always like that. Those are the things you definitely want to accept and take those if it's offered to you. You then have loans, which are considered part of a financial aid package. These are something that you would have to pay back after you graduate or after you stop attending. But they do have a lower interest rate and they do help you, pay money towards your balance for school. And then you have employment. So this is typically like an on-campus job that you might be offered as part of either a work-study program or maybe some other on-campus employment. Typically you work, well, I can't say typically, at NU you work typically like 10 to 12 hours a week and you earn money to either use for your own living expenses or you can put some of it towards your balance. But again, each school is going to be different on that. But employment, sometimes, like I said, a job on campus that can help pay for other expenses. Then the sources of financial aid that create, that go into those four categories, you have the federal government. And that's your largest source of aid, really, again, based upon that FAFSA form. You have states. So if you're a New York State resident, which I'm assuming most everyone is here, then they would, you potentially could be eligible from state money to going to specific schools. You have private sources, outside private scholarship companies. Community Foundation of Greater Buffalo is a really good one that I always recommend for students to apply for. Sometimes, parent employers can help out. Not often these days. They used to be a larger thing back in the day, but American Legions, all these places have scholarships that you can potentially apply for. As I said, largest source of financial aid. It is the aid that comes from the federal government is awarded primarily on the basis of that financial need, which comes from the FAFSA. You do have to apply for it every single year using the FAFSA application. So right now for your, as you're a senior, you're applying for the 21-22 FAFSA for your freshman year, and you'll be filling out the 22-23 one for your sophomore year. So you do have to do it every year. The good news is that, moving forward, it becomes a renewal process. You're not completing, inputting all that information all over again. It kind of, copies over a lot of what you already had in there. You just have to update the income information and house information. So it's not too bad. Something you do have to complete every year if you want to be considered for that aid. Some common federal aid programs that you will see, the largest one that will be in packages is the federal Pell Grant. that is based upon your EFC number. So if your EFC is about 5,100, I believe, or less, might be 5,300, you would actually be eligible for up to about $6,300 in the Pell Grant. And there is a range of that amount, again, based upon what your EFC is. There's the Teach Grant. This is for students going into the education field that meet specific criteria. You should talk to the schools you're looking at if you're thinking about that one. There's the Opportunity Grant. This one is you do have to be Pell Grant eligible for it. But I just want to, one note is that although the Pell Grant, if you're eligible for it, you get it regardless of anything else. The Opportunity Grant, each school is allotted a very small amount of this money. So even though you might technically be eligible for it, you might not see it in your package. And that's really just because schools have a limited amount of that to award. Then there's the work study, which I talked about earlier. Most work study programs are funded through the federal government, but there are institutional ones as well, but the government's the largest source of that. And then you go into your loans. So you have your subsidized and unsubsidized loans. These are loans in the student's name. Technically, the application is for them is through your FAFSA. That's you're applying for those. The subsidized is a need-based loan, and what that means is that as long as you have that financial need that we talked about earlier, based upon that calculation, you would be eligible for the subsidized loan. That for freshman students would be $3,500 for the year. And then, or up to, I should say, $3,500. And the unsubsidized loan, this means it is not a need-based loan. The subsidized, let me backtrack, the subsidized loan, need-based, and the government pays the interest for that while you're in school. The unsubsidized, not based upon need, and the government does not pay the interest on that while you're in school. The good news is that right now, at least for this year, the interest is pretty low. It's only at 2.75% for these loans. So compared to other loans you might get, it's a really good interest rate. You don't have to pay them back until after you graduate. You have a 6-month grace period after you graduate or stop attending, so you don't have to pay on them right away. Again, these are in the student's name. The other option is a PLUS loan. So this is still, it's a federal loan, but it's actually in the parent's name. So this is something that the parents can apply for on behalf of their students or their children. If they get approved for it, then they could put that towards the student's account. This is something that is always going to be in the parent's name. There's really no opportunity to have it transferred over to the student. I know I get asked that question sometimes. You can certainly make your own payment arrangements with the students, but it's something that is in the parent's name. Okay, programs. And move on to the states. Now, as I said, if you're a New York State resident, attending a New York State school, so the key here is that you are attending a New York State school. If you are a New York State resident and you go to, Pennsylvania, you can't take that New York State award with you. That does have to stay in New York State. It is based upon, there's several programs through New York State. The largest one is TAP, or the Tuition Assistance Program. And this one is based solely, it's based upon, I'll say need, but it's based upon income. So if your family income, which is parents and students' income from 2019, if your New York State net taxable income is $80,000 or less, then you would be eligible for the TAP grant. And that grant ranges from $500 all the way up to about $5,100. Again, and that's based upon where you fall into the income range. So that's the most popular program. There's a few other merit-based awards through New York State. There's also the Excelsior program through New York State if you're attending a state school. That currently is $125,000 or less. And that's AGI, not taxable. So if your AGI for New York State is $125,000 or less, and you meet very specific criteria as far as when you're receiving the program, you could receive free tuition at the state schools, minus any TAP and any Pell that you are already receiving. For private schools, their version of that is not called Excelsior, it's called the Enhanced Tuition Award, or ETA program. Not many private schools participate. Some do, and there's, I believe the full list is on the New York State website. But just keep in mind that not all private schools participate in that. Niagara used to. We no longer do that just because we did it for a couple of years. But unfortunately, the timing of the program, when the students got the money in, the criteria that they had to kind of keep up with it, just we did not think was fitting for our students, and we no longer participate in that. But for that one, it's not free tuition. It's up to $6,000, again, minus any TAP grant that you are receiving. So if you're interested in that, all the program requirements are on the New York State website to kind of take a look at. New York State does use the information from the FAFSA. So at the very end of the FAFSA, when you after you hit submit, it comes up with a confirmation page. It will also then say, do you want to transfer your information to your state application? I recommend doing that because it just saves some time. You don't have to, re-input everything. So if you're able to, at the time that you complete the FAFSA, definitely, hit that, link button so that at the very end, you can start completing your TAP application for New York State. If you don't do it at that time, let's say you've already done your FAFSA and you haven't done it yet, that's okay, not a problem. Just give the FAFSA about a week to process, and then you can go directly to the New York State website, which is listed in a little bit, but it's hesc.ny.gov, and you can actually go ahead and create your account and then submit all the applications there. Something to keep in mind, unlike FAFSA where you can list up to 10 schools, New York State only allows you to list one school. So if you're transferring your information from the FAFSA to New York State, it will take the first school that's listed on your FAFSA. Please be sure to keep track of what that is, because if you end up going to another school that wasn't listed number one on your FAFSA, you will have to update that school code with New York State. Otherwise, that money will never go to the school you're actually attending. So it's really important to keep track of that. Here at Niagara, we definitely follow up with everybody all the time. Okay, we estimated this award for you, but we don't see that it's coming in. But not every school is like that. So it's really up to you as the student or the parent to keep on track of that. So just keep that in mind as you kind of go along in the process. The deadlines do vary, but I always just like to say, please try to have all this done before you start school. It will make things so much easier going forward. Especially if you're thinking of going to a private school, you really want to know what that financial aid package is before you commit to anything. And the last slide, as far as sources go, is really the private sources or employers. As I said, employers these days may or may not be a good avenue. Although I know if you work at Wegmans, they have scholarships for students going to school. So there's, definitely companies out there that will help out. But please try to look for outside private scholarships as much as you can. Those deadlines or those applications, I should say, are going to start, really opening up. January is typically a really good month for that, and they start becoming due like March or April. Community Foundation of Greater Buffalo, a great resource. I've seen students receive up to $6,000 per year from that. So it definitely does not hurt to, try for those. Talk to your guidance counselors to see if they have any scholarships that they're aware of, and just kind of start searching. There, of course, is like scholarships.com, fastweb.com. Those are national sites. Doesn't hurt to look at those, but just know that you're kind of competing with everyone else in the nation for that. There are plenty of local scholarships that are available. You just kind of have to do a little bit of legwork. And I know you might not want to write essays, because when I was in high school, my senior year, I did not want to write any of those essays for those scholarships. But now that I'm on the other side of it and I see how much money some students get, yeah, write the essays. Take that time. You can switch them up sometimes if you're able to. Just make sure you change the names on them for whoever you're applying to. Take the time to do that. Even if it's $500, that's bucks. So it does not hurt to do that and to start early. Okay, so now that I kind of went through all that, one of the questions I do get asked often is, okay, well, I fill out the FAFSA, but the information is based upon, pretty much 2 years ago, 2019 at, this point. My situation has changed, especially with the pandemic going on and continuing to go on. We know things, might not be the same. So if the situation has changed as compared to 2019, income has been reduced, perhaps a divorce has happened, heaven forbid, a death has happened, any one of those things, please contact the schools that you're looking at. And then again, I would say the ones that you are seriously looking at, because if you're applying to 10 schools, you probably don't want to do this, at all schools. But if you are, take the top, 3 or 4 that you're really serious about, contact them, ask them what their process is. They will either potentially ask you to submit further documentation showing the reduction in income or whatever the situation might be, and they'll see if there's anything additional that they can do for your FAFSA. Maybe it's just a normal appeal. So let's say nothing happened, income stayed the same, there was no change in circumstances, but you just know, looking at the finances, I'm going to need some additional funding in order to be able to go to the school. Don't hesitate to reach out to the schools, and we would just look at that as what we call like a regular appeal to see if there's any additional funds that we can provide. for maybe not so much at state schools. I can't really speak to that, but at least for private schools, for sure, we would like to get as many students as we can, of course. So definitely, reach out to them, and they will definitely. I'm sure most of them, especially in this Western New York area, will work with you to see what they can do. Don't Just know though that you might have to provide some additional documentation. You might have to provide other financial aid packages from other schools that you're comparing, this whoever you're appealing to. So just be prepared to do that. But again, don't hesitate to reach out and ask. And the last thing I wanted to go over is on the other booklet that was sent out. It's purple to me, probably not purple to you. It's probably just white. But at the and it kind of goes over a lot of the information I talked about. So it gives you all the websites in it. But the very last page, you can see, but you're probably also looking at my screen. But the very last page is the financial aid letter worksheet. And I highly encourage you to use this as you start to receive your financial aid packages from all the different schools. It's really a direct comparison. So, you're going to put down what exactly is charged to each school, whether you're living on campus or not, and all the different awards you have been given, and loans as well. And this really, and I think on the next page too, yeah. And so the very bottom, you're going to do the math of, okay, this is what the charges are, and this is what the financial aid is, and this is the remaining cost. And it's really important that you do this and break it down from school to school, because I do think that students and parents can get confused with sometimes how things are presented and not knowing what the real cost is. And they might get really I don't know if they overexcited, but they might get excited that one school is giving me $40,000, but they might also cost $70,000. And so you still owe 30,000 there, and compared to another school that, gave you 15, but they only cost 25. So you really need to do that breakdown. And this will also help you in the appeals process as well. Because if you are being asked for additional information, you can always kind of give them this breakdown that you do for this different schools to show, well, listen, this school gave me this, and this is what I can afford. Are you able to do this? So please be sure to use that as you go along in the college process, and hopefully it's a tool that will help you out throughout the process. Contact information again is listed above, or not above, it's on the screen. But if you do have any questions moving forward, feel free to reach out. But I will actually see if there's any other questions that come up in the chat. I'm going to stop recording, but I'll keep sharing my screen.